Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Much better, much better. Thank you very much. My name is Yahuwah Williams. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the inaugural convening of the college. We have an exciting evening planned, but before we begin, I'd like to take the opportunity to recognize, among the many wonderful people gathered here today, two very special people. The greatest among you shall be your servant. For whomever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Powerful words from the Gospel of Matthew that encapsulate the lives of two tremendous human beings and Tommies. CAS Board Member Brad Paleachek and University of St. Thomas Vice President for Government Relations Doug Kennis, both of whom we recently lost. The last time I saw Doug was the day before I left for vacation this summer. He stopped me just past the arches with that unmistakable grin in the hopes of pressing me into service for a panel on the legacy of 1968. A conference we will hold this October 26th in his memory. I never met Brad personally, but I've been profoundly touched by those who knew him and their remembrances of a man who, like Doug, never missed an opportunity to serve. We pause tonight not to mourn them, but to celebrate their lives of these two extraordinary Tommies, both of whom left powerful etchings, not only in brick and mortar, but also on the more delicate concrete of our memories and our hearts. A moment of silence, please, for Brad Paleachek and Doug Kennis. Thank you. To get us started this evening, we have a very special treat that will have you clapping your hands and tapping your feet. So get ready to be moved to the edge of your seat by the powerful, soulful beat, I Become Jesse Jackson. Ha ha. By this powerful, soulful beat of Cadenza, a talented women's a cappella group at the University of St. Thomas, founded in 2014, who love to sing and share their diverse love for music with the world. Tonight, they will share their talent with us. Please give me a warm St. Thomas welcome for Cadenza.
I'm gonna make a change for once in my life. It's gonna feel real good, gonna make a difference, gonna make it right. As I turn up the collar on my favorite winter coat, this wind is blowing my mind. I see the kids in the street without enough to eat. Who am I to be blind, pretending not to see their needs? A summer's disregard, a broken bottle top, and one man's soul. They follow each other on the wind, you know, 'cause they got nowhere to go. That's why I want you to know I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. Na 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 na. I've been a victim of a selfish kind of love. It's time that I realize that there was some with no home, not a nickel to loan. Could it be really me pretending that they're not alone? A willow deeply scarred, somebody's broken heart, and a washed out dream. They follow the pattern on the wind, you see, 'cause they got no place to be. That's why I'm starting with me. I'm starting take a look at yourself and then make a change. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make the change. You gotta get it right when you got the time. You can't close your mind. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. Come on, turn the radio on. It's Friday night and I won't be long. Gotta do my hair, put my makeup on. It's Friday night and I won't be long till I hit the dance floor, hit the dance floor. I got all I need. No, I ain't got cash, I ain't got cash, but I got you, baby. And baby, I don't need dollar bills to have one tonight. I love cheap pills. Baby, I don't need dollar bills to have one tonight. I love cheap pills. And another one bites the dust. Oh, I cannot conquer love. And I might have thought that we were one. Wanted to fight this war without weapons, but life got thick skin and an elastic arm. But you were good, mommy, too sharp. I'm like a rubber band until you take your heart. Yeah, I'm as fast as you wash me fall apart. I'm titanium, 'cause I've got an elastic heart. I'm titanium. I was a broken thing, had a voice, but I could not sing. I let me down, I struggled on the ground. Oh, but there's a scream inside, we all try to hide, we hold on so tight. I don't wanna die, no. I don't wanna die, I don't wanna die. Yeah, no, I don't care if I sing off key. I found myself in my melody. I sing for love, I sing for me. I shout it out like a bird set free. No, I don't care if I sing off key. I found myself in my melody. I sing for love, I sing for me. I shout it out like a bird set free. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, jump. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, jump. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, jump. Going back till I lose count. I'm gonna swing from the chandelier, from the chandelier. I'm gonna live high tomorrow. Doesn't exist, like it doesn't exist. I'm holding on. I'm gonna fly like I'll burn through the night. Feels like tears as they dry. I'm gonna swing from the chandelier, from the chandelier.
Thank you, Cadenza. People ask me, what does the honor roll sound like? That's what the honor roll sounds like at the University of St. Thomas. I want to introduce now my associate deans, Mark Stansberry O'Donnell, Lisa Waldner, and Jana Diddy, to introduce our new faculty.
So if the new faculty, you know who you are, could come up onto the stage. Okay, we're pleased tonight to introduce you to our new faculty in the college, all of whom you can see on the screen behind me as well as up on stage here. One of the greatest pleasures of working in the dean's office is the chance to interview candidates for the positions and to learn about their innovative research. In promoting the teacher-scholar model in the college, it was stimulating to think about how their research could impact their teaching and the possibilities for engaging our students in projects that could impact our community. We would like to introduce them to you now and welcome them as the future face of the College of Arts and Sciences.
So we'd ask that you just hold your applause until we're done with the introduction so we can welcome these fine new faculty as a group. I'd like to start with Carolyn Zeiner. She's an assistant professor in biology. Her research focuses on fungal microbial biogeochemistry. There you have it. And she's teaching microbiology for our various bioscience majors this fall. Junsen Tang is assistant professor in actuarial science and mathematics. His research focuses on derivative pricing, hedging, and life insurance product designs, and he'll be teaching 2 sections of theory of interest for majors this fall. Audra Neuer, assistant professor in family studies. Her research focuses on interpersonal and family communication in underrepresented social groups, and she is going to be teaching the Introductory Foundations of Family Science course this fall. Amelia McNamara, assistant professor in computer and information science. Her research focuses on statistics education, statistical computing, data visualization, and spatial statistics, and she'll be teaching a number of statistics courses this fall. Brian Manner, he's a visiting assistant professor in chemistry, and he's going to be focusing on management and coordination of our general chemistry program, and so as such we'll be teaching general chemistry lectures and labs this fall. Jamin Kim, assistant professor in history. His research focuses on empire, borderlands, and sovereignty with a global historical perspective in Eastern Asia. And he'll be teaching, as you might imagine, East Asian civilizations and global perspective as part of our core curriculum. Amy Hedman Robinson is associate professor in our health and exercise science programs. Her research focuses on mental health help seeking and community-based suicide prevention interventions. And so she'll be teaching a nutrition for health and fitness and also a program planning and evaluation for health education majors. Caleb Goltz is an assistant professor in political science, and his research considers the legal and political foundations of colony collapse disorder and is interested in how civil law governs the behaviors of citizens. And so he's going to be teaching government and politics as part of our core curriculum and also constitutional rights and liberties for majors. Emily Cartwright is visiting faculty in the biology department. Her research interests involve host-adaptive immune response to viral infection, vaccination, and antiviral therapy. And she'll be teaching in the introductory sequence for bioscience majors this year. And last but not least, Scheherazade Ahmadi, assistant professor in history. Her research focuses on the socioeconomic independence and social and political consequences of porous borders in modern Iran and Iraq. She will be teaching the Middle East and North Africa in global perspective as a part of our core curriculum, and then also non-state actors in the Middle East and in North Africa. So please join the Dean's Office in welcoming these fine teacher scholars to our community.
And while they're standing, could I have all the College of Arts and Sciences faculty please stand and be recognized? Be recognized along with our new faculty, please. Thank you. Thank you. Would now like to recognize our CAS Board of Directors. First and foremost, I want to recognize my board chair, the incredible Ms. Kelly Larman. Kelly, can you wave? Thank you. Our current board members, Mr. Chris Heim, Ms. Jennifer Kincaid, Mr. Harold Slawick, Dr. Neil Sorensen, Ms. Kelly Thomas Reese, Reverend Larry Snyder, Ms. Lisa Anderson, Mr. Thomas Flynn, and Ms. Ann Folkman. But I'd also like to recognize our newest board members, beginning with Mr. John Ozzie Nelson. John, can you please stand if you're here? Did I see him earlier? Not here. Mr. Peter Lydon, who's our speaker today. Peter, do you mind standing and being recognized? Thank you. Mr. Jim Nicolai, please stand. Thank you, sir. And our veteran, returning veteran, Brian McEnany, please stand. Please join me in giving a warm round of applause to our newest board members. Last but not least, I would like to recognize our seniors and all other CAS and UST students. Please stand to your feet and be recognized for your outstanding academic achievement. We also have a few Doherty Family College students joining us this evening. A very special welcome to you. You are UST family as well, so thank you for coming. I now turn our attention to tonight's program and introducing the speaker, but I wanted to offer a few remarks first. So, good evening, First President Sullivan, Provost Plum, College of Arts and Sciences Board of Advisors, distinguished faculty, current Tommies, community partners, and friends. It is my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our inaugural celebration, Convening the College. In just a few weeks on September 25th, we will mark the centennial anniversary of the passing of the man hailed as the consecrated blizzard of the Northwest. Irish immigrant, priest, and principal founder of the university, Archbishop John Ireland. Ireland, who presided over what was then the Archdiocese of St. Paul, was known not only for his robust will and personality, but also for his marked ability to transform vision into reality. He was able to accomplish this largely through his openness to work outside traditional frameworks. While this sometimes rankled those inclined to maintain the status quo, he refused to be siloed. He saw his work in forging a community as too important, and he saw education as a critical tool in accomplishing this goal. Along with his belief that the church should not simply be a presence but a dynamic force in the community, Archbishop Ireland was also an ardent champion of Catholic higher education. By educating civic-minded, morally directed contemplatives in action, Ireland hoped to imbue graduates with the same activist passion that directed his own moral compass. In this regard, the college was his crowning achievement. But he knew he could not do it alone. One of his primary collaborators was the equally strong-willed railroad tycoon, James J. Hill. The men developed a close bond, finding the space, despite their different faiths and callings, to work together for the greater good of the community they both loved. The birth of the college thus began with the convening of two great minds, committed to service with a shared vision of an academic institution working to better the life of the community it was designed to serve. The spirit of that convening is still embodied in our mission, inspired by the Catholic intellectual tradition to educate students to be morally responsible leaders who think critically, act wisely, and work skillfully to advance the common good. To the members of the senior class who have joined us this evening, you are the fruit and the inheritors of that mission. We look to you as we have to countless Tommies before you to live the mission in lives of service, inspired by the same desire to contribute to the greater good, undaunted by the challenges of the contemporary moment. And to be clear, our new age brings new challenges, which our distinguished guest, Mr. Peter Lydon, will outline tonight. But even before he speaks, I'm here to tell you that the college, or the college, the cornerstone of this magnificent institution of higher learning, is here to answer the call. For just as Ireland and Hill had to confront the challenges and obstacles of the world they inherited in 1885, today we must be prepared to do the same. They did so with the fearlessness and a resolve that speaks to us across generations. At the time of his death in 1918, the Catholic Bulletin, for instance, observed that the close of Bishop Ireland's career was, quote, like the gradual descent of the flaming orb of day into a calm and peaceful sunset, end quote. the peaceful sunset has now turned to the present dawn of decision, calling upon the flaming orb in the form of Bishop Ireland's progeny to rise to the occasion. Our contemporary moment needs grounded women and men of service to work toward peace and for the betterment of humanity. But that can only be accomplished, as Bishop Ireland understood, through a deep collaboration and investment with the community, a convening of minds of people of different firms and faiths, committed to tackling the great questions of the day. That is why tonight, the College of Arts and Sciences is announcing the launching of 3 externally facing centers and a newly reimagined study abroad program committed to reconnecting with and carrying out this critical part of our historic mission. To our community partners gathered here tonight, we look forward to working with you in ushering in a new age of collaboration as your partners in restoring, revitalizing, and reimagining the city of St. Paul and beyond. In these endeavors, we will find ample support in these new centers, meant to position the college as this community's think tank, steward of shared vision, and incubator of action. First, the Center for Health, Wellness, and Sustainability will address issues and questions of human and environmental health, broadly speaking. It will include, but not be limited to, issues of global warming, sustainability, energy, public health, mindfulness, and environmental justice. One of our prospective partners is here this evening. We're currently, for example, exploring the possibility of a multi-year project involving research to support the health and well-being of geriatric communities of color in the city of St. Paul. Next, the Center for Arts and Humanities in the Public Interest will team with the community partners to share and preserve the arts as a critical part of human expression, providing opportunity and resources for community partners, faculty, and students to pursue applied research projects that demonstrate how the arts and humanities create new ideas, concepts, and designs that improve culture, society, and productivity, as well as drive innovation. This year, for the first time, we will be depositing pieces of our world-famous Osmond art collection in local schools as a means of providing new opportunities for young people to explore the importance of art while broadening cross-cultural perspectives and exploring their own avenues for historical and cultural preservation and self-expression. Finally, the Institute for Civility and Public Discourse will focus on repairing and creating new pathways for its civil discourse through the promotion of faculty-student applied research projects, community-based research opportunities, public lectures and forums, and a supportive scholarship that fosters conversation around critical questions of civic engagement and civic participation, and the meaningful work of elevating civic-mindedness and civic responsibility, consistent with the emphasis of civility and reasoned debate, synonymous with the Catholic intellectual tradition. This center will also provide a space for quick responses and impromptu conversations around current events. Let me close this evening by asking everyone assembled to look deep within the genetic code we share as a community, our DNA, as it were. I use that not as a scientific term, but as an acronym for our dreams, how we nurture those dreams, and ultimately how we act upon them when our values, our communities, our neighbors, or our environment is threatened. To the students, dream big. In the midst of chaos, dream of the world that could be by immersing yourself in the world that is. In the process, learn to embrace a new role as partners in, rather than agents of transformation. As servants, always remembering that is the true hallmark of greatness. To our new and returning faculty, the finest faculty in the world, continue to nurture through your teaching, research, and service a community that appreciates and privileges scholarship in the public interest, born of partnerships and collaborations with those on the front lines of our battles against ignorance, intolerance, and inequality. To our community partners, see us exactly as that, your partners, and see the centers, our faculty, and our students in a new light as a resource to bring the accumulated research and learning of our academic community, coupled with your own critical learning and expertise, and in shared endeavor to improve the lives as many people as possible. To our community as a whole, we must act and help to preserve and live our mission, because the college is rising. And now, it is my distinct honor to introduce tonight's speaker, Mr. Peter Lydon. You are in for a treat. In fact, public safety warned me to have all of you buckle your seatbelts. Now, I informed them there are no seatbelts in here, but so Please, no one get too excited because we don't want to be responsible. But Mr. Lydon is a phenomenal speaker. He is also one of our own. He attended St. Thomas after growing up on campus, a campus that his father Donald helped to lead for 30 years in the 1980s. Since attending St. Thomas, he's forged an incredible globe-spanning career of storytelling and discussing big ideas with remarkable people. Early in his career, he worked at the Star Tribune and started the newspaper's first beat to explain the internet, writing a 50,000-word special project called On the Edge of the Digital Age. He then moved to Wired and became its managing editor while continuing to cover the technological boom of the 90s and 2000s. Lydon has most recently worked for several pioneering organizations and founded a variety of startups, including the latest Reinvent, that facilitates conversations with thought leaders from around the world. Ladies and gentlemen of the College of Arts and Sciences and the University of St. Thomas, please join me in welcoming a warm homecoming to Mr. Peter Lydon.
You have this? Wow. Well, that is a, oops, do you have this? There we go. That is a warm welcome. It's hard to live up to that one, but thank you so much for this welcome. Thank you for that introduction. It is true that I grew up from age 2 on this campus. Went to a lot of basketball games, football games. I worked on the grounds crew. I was in the first class that admitted women here. Think about that. Talk about a historic. I was one of the first to go on your the study abroad program, which I know you're going to be promoting much more here. So I do have my roots here. But one of the things about my father, Donald, who actually was worked here for 30 years, my mother, who actually is here, worked here as well for about 15 years after that, Arlene. But my dad always thought of himself as a long-range planner. And I was the oldest of 4 kids, and we used to tease him all the time about him thinking about the future and thinking about long-term planning. And here it is, I end up doing my life's work, and I end up helping people think about the future and long-range planning. So there you go. Do not tease your parents, all those students in here. Because I'm going to be talking to you about essentially what's going on in this country, where we are, what's happening on the planet right now, and really where we're probably heading in the next coming decades here. And it's something that I've been spending my entire career thinking about this. And here I am returning back here to where I started to actually give you my latest thinking on where we're really at with all this. Now, the other thing that actually I'm returning is basically about 25 years ago, the dean mentioned this, I actually was cut loose by the Star Tribune at the time. I was working there as a young reporter. And they said, you know, there's this, and I had convinced them that they had to turn their heads into this internet. This thing was going to be a big deal. Believe me, actually, it was a hard time explaining this to people and actually getting them to go around with this at the time. And in the early 90s, I said, let's do this beat. And they eventually got them so excited, they said, well, you know what, why don't you just get cut free and think about what is really going on here and explain to the Twin Cities what is happening here. And so I spent an entire year trying to wrap my head around this, and they sent me to California. I spent a lot of time in Northern California, and I came back and wrote a 50,000-word series over 4 Sundays, 4 special sections called On the Edge of the Digital Age. And it is actually, having reread it, it's been remarkably kind of holds well. So, because here, essentially, is my daughter, Emma. And one of the first stories I did here was a day that started off the entire series. It was a day in the life of a woman in about 30 in 2020, a day in the Wired life. And my daughter, Emma, was about 2 years old at the time, and I was trying to think, okay, what's life going to be like for her in 2020? And this is, again, we're talking 1994 when I'm doing this, right? And interesting enough, I just reread that story, and it's quite remarkable what I was talking about. I was talking about, well, the story of the one day she wakes up with an intelligent agent kind of waking her up, just like we now have with Siri and the Amazon Echo. And I said, well, you know what? She grabs her wireless pad for news and goes out on the porch to kind of read, which is, of course, an iPad. And later in the day, she's walking around with what I called a personal communicator. There's going to be some way that we're going to be, this again, we didn't have cell phones at the time. Remember this, folks. And so there's going to be some kind of personal communicator, which is, again, the iPhone. And then she spends all her day working on video connections with people all over the country. Of course, now Zoom and all the things we all know. And I said, you know what? Her husband was actually working in these kind of mobile places that you could kind of rent out for a while, and he was kind of working around, didn't have an office, no one had an office. And ultimately, they end up the day looking at this giant TV screen that was filling the whole wall, a flat panel TV screen, which again, back then was like, we had these big tubes and everything else. All of this basically came to pass. And that was just 25 years ago. None of this existed, all of it's here. And so there is a way to rigorously think about what's going on today and what will happen in the future. So what I'm going to base, and here's the first, this was one of the first web series. They did this whole 4-part series on the web. And I wrapped my head around it. A lot of it was about the technology changes, the coming trauma in the economy, most of which we've worked ourselves through now. And ultimately, I was trying to grapple with ultimately where was this going to go. And I was talking about it as the dawn of a second Renaissance. I was trying to think, is it some parallel to the printing press and something about the Renaissance, all this new expression? That was too far off for me to really nail. And that's what I'm going to actually talk more about today, because it's less the Renaissance, but it's the following age, the Enlightenment, which I'm going to make some parallels to. So what I want to just say is I spent my time, this is my essentially career. In the 80s, it was the PCs. The 90s, it was the internet. The kind of 2000s was the mobile expansion. And now, the tech titans. I mean, after all those years, these were little dinky startups, and now they're running the world economy. The next group here, the students who are starting today, you're going to actually look at the next 40 years, an incredible period here. You're going to be actually grappling with AI, artificial intelligence is first coming up. You're going to have to really come to terms with genetic engineering and genetics. You're going to come to terms with essentially climate change and new energy sources, which we're going to have to come up with. And ultimately, we'll be doing things like going to space. Who knows what we're going to be doing there. But the point is, don't think of yourself as static now. Think expansively about what's going on in the future. Now, he mentioned I left the Strip to go to Wired. And from Wired magazine, I was able to sit in the middle of Silicon Valley and the Bay Area and was absolutely in the network of really amazing folks in all kinds of different fields, reinventing essentially the world. And over the last 25 years, I've essentially built this network. And ultimately, my latest company is called Reinvent, which we spend a lot of time going to all these different fields and talking to the leading thinkers, the leading innovators in all these spaces. I run a thing called What's Now San Francisco, which every month we take a leading figure in one of these fields and have them come and explain to us what is going on in that field that's important for everyone outside that field to know. What are the problems you're grappling with right now, and where's the world going? And we've been doing this for 3 years. We've now opened one in New York. And what I'm talking to you today is not as me, but I'm trying to suck up everything I've been learning from these folks every month, every week, over the last 25 years. Now, one of the beauties of what I've been able to do is do a lot of public speaking because of my position there. I do about one keynote like this a month. I've been doing that for like 20-some years, usually to kind of business audiences, conferences, executives, often though universities now. I have quite a few universities this year. And one of the things I do frequently on this is I use a technique to get people to kind of think about the big picture, pull themselves out of today. So what I say is, forget about the crazy running around on the ground right now. Pull yourself back and understand what is happening in your city, in your region, in your country. Think geographically, how do we fit in the world? But also think about time. What are people in 50, 100, 500 years from now? What are they going to think about what's going on in the early 21st century? And when you think like that, you get squeezed down the essence. All the craziness of cable TV and Twitter and all that's going to just totally go away. And it'll get down to some really fundamental things that is really what we're living through right now. And if we get to that point, you have to see that we are living in an extraordinary moment in history right now. I mean, really, people will be talking about this 500 years from now of, oh my God, what happened in the early part of the 21st century. The kind of decades before, a little bit before the 21st century, and then right these early years here. It will go down literally as with every other kind of critical moment in human history. It'll be right in that same game. Now, when you think about what's going on here, there's essentially been two things that happen that are driving the big transformation here, both at a global level but also on a national level here. And it's not like it's totally unprecedented. We get in our places in history where we essentially have deep structural changes with new technologies and the economy changing, so that we go from like an agrarian economy to an industrial economy. These kind of fundamental changes essentially make the old ways of organizing things, the old ways of governing ourselves obsolete. And we have to kind of reinvent ourselves to kind of deal with the new realities. The other thing that happens periodically is we come up against unprecedented challenges. And those challenges they're out of the depth of what the old ways of thinking. So you have to really think hard and long. And so we have done in American history what I would say about 4 fundamental reinventions over the course of our time here. And these reinventions happen in about the space of about 15 to 20 years. They are driven by these big, deep changes, and they essentially are an explosion of innovation across all kinds of different ways of going: society, the culture, the politics. And we come out of that and we have about a 50-year run of the new system working pretty well. And so if you think about the last, one big one was essentially, was right around in 1800, the first part of the 19th century. We've got a whole roll of different kind of agricultural technologies, cotton gin, all that kind of stuff, that essentially started to make the old way of farming, slave owning, and things like that, which were also morally reprehensible, but it actually started to transition us. We started to actually to think about a totally different way of organizing America. We did another one, essentially about midway to the second half of the century, was around steam power and early manufacturing. We started pulling people off the farms in beginning of doing that. There was, again, some fundamental technologies, economics, started to have also political repercussions, which we'll get to in a second. Early 20th century was around electricity, fundamentally reorganizing, allowing us to pile into cities and build skyscrapers and do all kinds of different ways to organize how we actually did America. And then we had another one after the war around the internal combustion engine. We spread out to suburbs. We did all kinds of stuff. We've had, again, technological, economic transformations in each of these eras. Well, we're in another one of those now. We're in the relatively early stages of that fundamentally shift here. Now, what I'm going to say tonight, what is going on here that's so fundamental? Well, I will say, the digitization of everything, the idea that the computerization of everything and the interconnection of those computers is a world historical phenom. It is essentially allowing pretty much everything to get reorganized. This will definitely go down in world history as a threshold that allowed human beings to do a crazy amount of things, which we'll start to talk about, all the way to artificial intelligence coming very fast here. That, without exception, is a mind-blowing thing. Now, there's a second thing going, equally unprecedented, partly related to the expansion of this technology, is essentially the globalization of everything. This is the first time human beings are essentially reorganizing on a planetary scale. Never been done before. We didn't know how to do it. We've had kind of international excursions and relations, but not until now can we actually instantaneously do things around the world. And the third thing is we are getting our unprecedented challenges, not the least of which is climate change. And really, you can't talk about the future without talking about climate change, and I'm going to do that. Now, there's other challenges too, but what I just wanted to point out is those 3 major things are essentially forcing a fundamental reinvention at the deepest fabric of what we're doing in this country. Now, it's so deep that I would say if you took those 4 eras, there's actually one analogy which I didn't make, haven't for the last 10 years or so of doing this talk, there are talks like this, is what's going on today, I'm increasingly thinking is actually closer to what was going on in the first era of our country, the Founding Fathers era. And that the level of profound change we're going to be entering in the next 50 years here are going to be closer to civilizational change, that it's closer to the level of innovation that they went through, where they just started hey, how are we going to govern ourselves? Let's take the latest tools, the latest concepts, boom, we're going to try something new, not iterating or tweaking the old systems. And so that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about with you folks today, is how that works. Now, every one of these periods, 1800 was the revolution, they called it, of 1800 was the election of Jefferson, founder of the Democratic Party. Right around the middle of the 19th century, of course, is Abraham Lincoln, founder of the Republican Party, or essentially the founder of the Republican Party. We see giants of American politics were at every one of these junctures. This is Teddy Roosevelt. That was, again, a bipartisan thing. He was a Republican. There was a lot of Democrats who were also in that transformation. This isn't a kind of a partisan thing. And each party has played a big part in these transformations. The last big one we went through was coming off the Great Depression, World War II. In fact, we're still essentially living off that system right now. One that's breaking down, frankly. That we're not, Social Security and Medicare, it's all kind of gummed up. We can't really figure it out. What I'm trying to figure out is, are we just another one of those, or potentially are we actually even at a higher level? And I think it's worth, in an academic setting here, just to keep open to the bigger play here. Because something to go from analog world that many people here were born into a completely digital world, again, world changing, to go from essentially a world organized by nations and international relations to one that's increasingly going to be just seamlessly global, and one that essentially has got to go from unsustainable energy sources to some kind of new sustainability. These are so big that you got to think with a lens, almost at the level of how civilizations work. Now, the last time we essentially created the context for civilization was the Enlightenment. And that's where the founding fathers in America were at the tail end of the Enlightenment, which is our version of it. We were the young country. But really where it was going was essentially rooted in Europe. This is Isaac Newton, for example. And one of the things about a community of learning here, so much of the Enlightenment was driven by essentially the role of science and new knowledge. And once we open our minds to, oh my God, this is what we can do, it started to revolutionize all kinds of areas. So for example, London was kind of ground zero of that time. People don't think about it this way, but we essentially invented financial capitalism. There wasn't financial capitalism before this. We had to figure out monetary systems and gold standards and how we traded nationally. That was a fundamental system change that we're at the core still on. We had to essentially invent representative democracy, get rid of the rule of kings, all that kind of stuff. We're still, again, working in the same context of what they did, but that was whole cloth. We invented carbon energy. That was the beginning of essentially coal. They figured out, oh God, we can actually make more efficient energy out of coal, and then of course going on to oil and all that. We essentially built the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. All those fundamental systems were cracked in the space of about 1650 to 1780s. And I would argue here that if you had to take one place right now you'd start looking at, is San Francisco in the 80s to right about now. There is something similar going on, that there's some fundamental changes to capitalism are going to start happening. There is essentially I would predict over time, some fundamental shifts in how we actually govern ourselves in democracy. That's the hardest to actually envision right now. We're actually watching a transformation in our energy technologies off of carbon in a very fundamental way. And there's this whole new thing of biotech, genetics, and all that's just coming that essentially is going to blow open a whole new way of having to organize ourselves or limit ourselves or all kinds of stuff. Now, it's not just San Francisco, urban hubs all over the world, including here and all over the world here. But what I'm trying to get at here is think about, this is Star Trek, right? The way the founding fathers and the Enlightenment people were thinking was how are these systems going to work 250 years in the future? That's from now is when Star Trek's working. We got to be thinking really fundamentally about how the world's got to work very fundamentally differently on these new technologies, globally integrated planet, and sustainable. Now, what I'm going to do here is move you through, show the big picture there. I'm going to run through 6 quick things, relatively quick. One is talk a little bit from the Valley on how much that digital revolution is still to come. Talk economics a little bit on the global stuff. Ultimately, have to talk a tad on climate change without a lot there. But I also want to talk about demographic change here in terms of the next generations, including the new generation that's coming up, Generation Z. Talk a bit about how this education fits in this whole thing with a few thoughts. And then ultimately talk about the reinvention of America. The little politics, not partisan way, as best I can. But also, there's no way you can go through these changes without our politics being absolutely entangled in this. That's what politics is. It works out these difficult transitions. So let's talk tech for a minute here. So the secret formula, a lot of people may know this, but it's worth remembering. The core thing that's been driving the digital revolution is that every 2 years, roughly, engineers can get twice as many integrated circuits on a chip, which essentially shrinks the size, drops the price, but doubles the power. Doubles the power. And doublings, essentially, they start slow in the beginning of those things, but ultimately they start getting big. And if this goes on, this has been going on for 40 years of doubling the power of computer chips. So you go from an early PC like this, 1 megahertz, which is the unit of power of a computer, used to cost $5,000 in that one of the first PC, and now you get 4,000 megahertz for under $1,000. You get 25,000 times more powerful the computers. Well, it's a crazy dynamic of how, and there's no other industry that comes close to that kind of thing. Another way to think about it is clock speed. Megaflops is what they call it. You took the fastest supercomputer in the 70s like that, when I was around when I was in college. The fastest supercomputers went at 200 megaflops, is the way you measure it. Cost $31 million. The latest iPhone, not even the latest one, the iPhone 7 had 300 gigaflops, not megaflops, at gigaflops, and it costs less than $1,000. So you all are walking around with $31 million supercomputers in your pocket. But just think about that. That's pretty crazy. The other thing is size. It used to be a room, used to be a desktop. I mean, people remember it. Now they literally have computer chips in the earbuds of the iPhone. I mean, that's a computer. Every hotel room has a computer chip in it. It's like crazy how it's shrunk. And here's the cost thing. This is just a good example. If you go back to the 80s, when I started that 1980 thing, 1 gigabyte of storage, 1 gigabyte of storage cost $700,000, and today it's 4 cents. So you went from $700,000 to 4 cents. Now, if that was the auto industry, we'd be driving cars for a nickel, and in 2 years, they'd be 2.5 cents. And then pretty soon, they'd be given away in cereal boxes or something. I mean, it's like, there's nothing like this. So of course, it's going to be incredibly disruptive. Now, the other thing, which kind of gets to your knowledge space, is all that big data. If you go from the beginning of humans banging on rocks to capture information, all the way to 2003, we humans have created 5 exabytes. If you don't know what exabyte is, just say it's a lot more than gigabytes or terabytes or petabytes, but still 5 exabytes. Now, every 2 days we create that. And now the entire world's data is doubling every 2 years. So we have insanely big data, folks, insanely. Now, this brings the arrival of AI and advanced robotics. So you can see, I was just kind of giving you the refresher of how this change has gone and how it's continuing to go. So now we have such powerful computers, so much data, all in the cloud, that you can essentially have artificial intelligence. That's just beginning, folks, and it's getting better and better by the day, literally. I'll give you just an example. In New York, I just actually interviewed on stage in New York just in August the founder of this, Omnity. This is a company, right now you can go on the web and go here. You can use this search engine. It's an AI-enhanced search engine. It essentially is trying to use AI to say, here's the problem. Every day, 10,000 new scientific papers are published, just in English, every day. Now, there is no academic, there's no student, there's no one who can be close to that, right? And so this guy's figured out a way to get AI to essentially figure out, if you bring an article and put it in here, it'll analyze all the words and say, oh, these are rare words that are used in a certain way. It will find you every rare word combo like that around the world, outside the web in all kinds of databases, and connect you to somebody in Farsi who's working on the same problem using the same rare words. And anyhow, this is how AI is now augmenting already things we do in a positive way that will actually work for many people. Another thing is, you've heard about AI being able to win in chess and Go and Jeopardy. AI now, I was just at a thing this summer talking to a founder who's now got independent AIs who are running or essentially are acting like humans in these multiplayer online games. And the AI is essentially starting to beat humans. So the little teams of 5 AIs are actually playing 5, humans, and they're starting to outfox them, running over hills and strategies to kind of get them on the backside and all that kind of stuff. And then one of the reasons is the AI literally can play 100 years of the game in the space of about a week, And so they learn all these things super fast. And this is happening today. Again, this guy is not public with this yet, but and this isn't the game, by the way. But the point is, we're in it now. And so when you start to think about AI, it really is going to be one of the big challenges, and it's going to have a huge impact on education. One of the things we have to really start thinking about is the division of labor between what are the machines going to do and what are the humans going to do. Now, there's all these scary stats. This is one of the least scary ones. It's moderated, but that 30% of all jobs are going to be affected by AI by 2030. That's, 12 years from now. There's other ones say 50%, all kinds of stuff. The point is, and this doesn't mean they're all going to go away. It just means the machines will start to be able to do a lot of things. They'll be able to do things, yes, they can do things that blue-collar workers can do. They're going to be doing law. They're going to be doing, better analyzing of medical records, all kinds of stuff. And so we have to be thinking, what are you going to teach people in these universities to do when anything routine, the way to think about this is anything routine, manually routine or mentally routine, is going to be done by a machine. No question about it. And in fact, if you look at the stats since the 80s, we can actually see anything routine in the mind, like, let's say accountants or something like that, just kind of doing tax returns, not complex ones, but just basic ones, or routine manual, the jobs have flatlined. There's no growth in those since the 80s. The ones that have grown is anything creative, non-routine cognitive, or non-routine manual, like, in fact, a barista, like, has to do 17 things and calm down the woman who's, coffee spilled, all that kind of stuff. A machine ain't going to do that. And so anyhow, there is a kind of a non-routine is the way I think about this. My feeling ultimately is not, and almost everyone I talk to, it's not going to be that AI is going to become our overlords and we're all going to be enslaved. Get away from that. But we are going to figure out a way that there has to be a way of how do humans work best? How do we get augmented by these machines? How do the machines do the dumb, boring, routine stuff that nobody wants to do, honestly, and actually get them moving on new jobs? Jobs are just solving problems. Work is just taking on a new problem. Until we run out of problems in the world, we aren't going to run out of jobs. We just have to kind of move the ball and get them out of what the machines can do better. Let's move the humans to what they really do best. Now, another quick thing here, and just going to keep moving fast. The connectivity, I was just talking about power, essentially, has now gotten us to the AI place. But it's also the connectivity. And the thing like the Moore's Law thing I said, the other thing to think about is a thing called the network effect, or Metcalfes Law it's rooted in. That's a simple way to understand this is, if one person invites two people into a network, how hard is that? And those two people invite two people, how hard is that? That system doubles. That's an exponential growth. If those four then, just to say, I'm just going to get two people, boom, it doubles again. That's exponential growth. Exponential growth. Pretty soon it's out to the wall, out to the street, you get it. The same phenom. This is what's behind the building of incredible, how fast the internet has blown and how fast Facebook grows, things like that. Now look at this. This is something to give you some perspective. If you just go back to 2000, that is who was on the internet. 31%, only 31% of North Americans. Literally all these other regions, pretty much nobody. Look, even Europe only had 13%. This is 2000, 18 years ago. You go back to 2010, that jumps up to here. We're pretty reasonable, but look at the Middle East is at 35, where we were 10 years before. What's happening there? The whole young people are overthrowing governments, with cell phones, all kinds of stuff. That's amazing. And now, if you click now, it's not quite the full decade yet, but I got the latest in 2018. Africa is where we were in 2000, and look at everybody else is starting to fill out. That's extraordinary to go from where almost nobody connected to pretty much the whole planet. Not really the whole planet. So we know now about 55% of the planet's on the internet. 75% of the planet is on cell phones. Well, we know how this works. We're eventually, only going to connect everybody over the basic telephone. You'll basically get a little voice line. And we know on the backs of that, you can get rudimentary email and internet. And on the backs of that, you can build more robust connections. And so within 10 years, everybody on the planet is going to have high bandwidth connections to $31 million supercomputers that allow video connections wherever you are in the world. This isn't crazy talk. This is business plans. So you got to think, okay, that's a different world. So one of the things to think about that is another trick from the Valley that you play over and over is how paradigm shifts work. So this is a technology adoption curve, which you may well be familiar with, but it's worth reminding. Every technology starts with the early adopters. That's people like me that are the innovators who just grab something, spend a crazy amount of money. That drives my wife nuts when I buy it. But anyhow, you get that. Then there's the early adopters who say, hey, that's kind of cool. I want to try that. Then you get the kind of first in the block, early majority, and then you get the late majority catching up with the Joneses. And ultimately, you get the laggards who, like my mother, maybe wants a black and white television, but you can't get them anymore. So, sorry, Mom. But anyhow, this happens all the time. Now, the key thing is the tipping point. The game in the Valley is always figure out where is the tipping point, because not everything goes this way. Some get that far and they crash. But here's more important to you as educators. It's not where the technology gets adopted, it's how the systems get built around those technologies. How do the systems change? And the old system will hold on for a while until you get this new technology that says, you mean you can actually get a car to come pick you up through your cell phone? That's kind of cool. And so a few people try that, and then a few others say, wow, that works. That's awesome. And then pretty soon, whoosh, there's no taxi industry. And it's basically everybody's driving Ubers and Lyfts. This happens in every kind of situation. Now, what's interesting for you, and I'd really think about this is essentially a chart that Mary Meeker, who's a very famous internet analyst, did. It's very comparable to the way I've thought about it, but I thought I'd borrow hers and give her credit here. But if you think about the impact of how thoroughly these sectors have adapted to these new technologies, pretty much the consumer experience of buying things is totally now online. Business is pretty thoroughly there. Security warfare and stuff is about 50-50 now. We're still trying to figure out cyber war. But education, now this does include lower education too, is not nearly far enough around the kind of wrapping around this. Healthcare, same kind of situation, and ultimately government regulations even farther behind. Now this is a pretty fair thing, I would say. Now certain institutions like maybe yours and others is in different things, but there is a ton more reinvention around these technologies that I think you guys have left in you. Now, I'm going to shift here to economics. I'm going to keep rat-a-tatting these things, and it's hopefully just to stretch your mind. Some of it might be a little controversial, but it's part of what we do in academic settings here. So, this is the economic implication of that technological revolution, and this is really worth looking at. This is the market capitalization of Apple Computer from when they started to where they are now. They are the first trillion-dollar company in the world ever. But you got to remember, when I was back here writing my story here was here, they were flatlined. They basically, brought jobs back in here to try to save the thing. Anyhow, it wasn't until here, and here's the iPhone, that boom, it took off. So this is a good example of a visionary, just focused, and not saying no until ultimately succeeding. Try again. That is one of the great things here. But look at, it's not just Apple. Look at this. This is the great transformation of the global economy. It has happened in the last 15 years. If you go back to 2001, this was the 5 most valuable companies in the world. GE, manufacturing, Microsoft, tech, coming off the dot-com crash, a boom, Exxon, oil, Citibank, finance, Walmart, retail. That's the 20th century economy. That is the commanding heights of the economy of that. 5 years later, 2006, a little bit of a shuffle there, a little more oil, but it's basically the same thing. Then all of a sudden, 2011, 5 years later, Apple pops in there. It's mostly kind of oil companies, interesting. And here's the big shift, 2016. Boom. Every single company, the top 5 companies in the world, are all technology companies, all on the West Coast, most of them in Silicon Valley. That was 2 years ago. If you just update it for the now, it's the same. They're staying. And Apple, this was just taken in May, so Apple's now $1 trillion. Amazon is now $1 trillion. This is the commanding heights of the global economy, and there's no way these companies are going to buckle fast. So this is where we're going for a while. Something to think about. Now, my feeling about this, having spent a lot of time with a lot of these folks, this is essentially the 3 founders of Airbnb. I just came off a project for 2.5 years with these guys. I got to know the top people in Airbnb, and these people are not out to screw the world. They don't want to be fabulously rich. You'd be amazed how little these guys get on their salaries just to keep everybody in the same game. There's a lot of goodwill here. These folks don't want to be the bad guys in history. I think there's a lot of movement here to actually work with the tech companies, these newly kind of powerful companies, to actually rework new things. But anyhow, this is a little side thing, because I know there's a lot of backlash against tech now, and some of it deserved, but a lot of it not. One of the reasons why they're so powerful is this global piece. And this is a good example here. This is the entire population of the United States, and this is the unique monthly users, I think in 2017, or actually it's early 2018, of YouTube, Google, and Facebook. The whole game is global right now, right? And in fact, here you are, you talk about, and the dean has been pointing out this global piece. You think about anything in the world right now, that's the population of the United States, this is the world. So where are you going to put your attention, right, in a globally interconnected world? It's the world. You can maybe carve out a little market here and there in the States, that's all good, and you can fight over that, but that's where the game is moving. And so it's interesting, despite what we've been told by Trump and others that, America doesn't win anymore, that is complete bunk, complete bunk. You take anything innovative, any innovative industry in the world right now, and the United States is either the top or in the game at the very top. I mean, there's nothing like Silicon Valley. There's nothing like Hollywood. There's some competition with Wall Street, biotechnology, aerospace, military, higher education. People don't go to China for higher education. They're coming here. They're all coming here. They're coming to this school. Healthcare, at least at the advanced levels, anything innovative, the U.S. is really interested into it. The thing is, they're over global markets now. So we're getting this incredible wealth is coming into this country at the top. And so I do want to throw this out here since you're all for the common good here, which I love that, by the way, that motto. This is the assets of the top 0.1% is the red line of how much assets of the country they own compared to the bottom 90% of everybody else is the blue line. And there was a point in the right here around the Great Depression where they were about 50-50. And then the great boom of the post-war boom, that got to the point where they spread the wealth. And then essentially in the early 80s here, it started to shift, partly around political kind of choices. And now, essentially, they're back together. This is unsustainable in my mind. And I think it's actually part of what you're seeing, this incredible kind of tension in our country right now. Besides tech, I wanted to add a couple things here about the globalization piece where there's no going back. Travel. This is crazy. There was no commercial travel till the 1950s. And now, essentially, this has been the growth of airline passengers. Till 3.3, there's only 7 billion people on the planet, right? There's 3.3 billion flights a year. Now, some of you are doing more than one, I know, and I am too. So, I mean, it is that. But I'm just saying it's pretty extraordinary what's going on here. This is tourism. This is a projection, actually, from now. But look at the growth in tourism in all these different areas. The projections, though, is only to go right off the charts. As the global middle class starts to get more wealth, and they're starting to actually, the first thing I want to do is travel. This is our planet getting kind of interconnected and essentially potentially overrun in many respects. And this brings up China. Now, I was a foreign correspondent for a while before I came to the Strip, and I was covering China. I was in China after Tiananmen Square. And this is Shanghai. That did not exist when I was in China in the late 80s. That has been built since 1980. That was a flat island of nothing. And that is now China. Now, you can go on and on about China, but here's the facts. China, I showed you the top 5 companies in the world. Those 2 blue ones, tech companies, are Chinese companies. They're giving Facebook a run for its money, Alibaba and Tencent. And again, we have a few hangers on here. China is in the game. They have a plan to get 73% of their population to the middle class by 2030. And ultimately, they are part of the big reason why the growth of population and the growth of the middle class is now charting up around the world, which is a good thing. We're pulling people out of poverty. All right, I'm shifting here quick to another topic, sustainability. Now, I don't know how contentious that is here, but I must say, the last 10, 20 years, I've been having to have a heck of a conversation with people out there about this. But let me just throw out a couple of things here. If you go back to the time of Christ, Jesus, this is CO2 in the atmosphere. This carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is what the heat trapping thing is that essentially causes global warming. So this is the Industrial Revolution, and boom, it's gone off the charts. You can go back 400,000 years. 400,000 years. Basically, this is when Homo sapiens started, right here. 400,000 years, that's carbon. We can know this from ice cores and stuff. And this is where we are now. We've shot right through there. And that thing is going straight up. And we're not slowing it down. You can also take another way to look at it. You can go, since we've been measuring temperatures on the planet in the 1880s accurately with the right equipment, it's been a constant going up, almost constant, certainly lately here. All 16 of the latest, of the most hottest years on record are all in the recent year, and this is happening all the time. So there's, in my opinion, not a lot of debate, but the point is the urgency of this is huge, 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 huge. And you guys in this class are going to spend the rest of your life working with this problem. Tons of job, tons of creativity, tons of all kinds of stuff going to be with you. But it's going to be your problem and the rest of us who are going to be hanging on here. But it's a huge thing. Now, there's a lot of positive things on this. I'm not the negative guy. I want to say there's a ton of positive things, a lot of changes going on in technology. Here's just one thing that's really amazing. This is the price of energy of all the different kind of carbon-based energies. That's the price of solar now. It's dropping just down because of the scaling that's happening. We're watching also the scaling up of solar. There are a lot of alternative energies going. We got a long way to go, but it is something that's helpful. And I want to say this to someone that's a young person thinking about what can I do about climate change. It's not just about energy tech. It's a fantastic book. I've interviewed this guy on stage too, Paul Hawken, how to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And I want to say the reason why. He took 100 of the leading reasons, hot ways to do this, and it's not all energy. If we did less food waste, if we did created food differently, if we basically used land differently, if we did materials differently, buildings, engineering, transportation differently, teaching women and girls, getting women to have less babies in developing countries, this would all pull carbon out of the atmosphere, help us solve this problem. There's tons of jobs, there's tons of careers, there's tons of challenges that you can all solve. And if we do take this seriously, we're going to have to transform the energy grid, the transportation, the urban footprint. I mean, all the different ways we're going to have to rebuild cities and get ready for more adaptability. That is growth all over the place. I saw some of the new teachers here in biology. This is the other thing. I don't even have time to go into this, but we are on the verge of biotech revolutions, which are going to have a lot of sustainable possibilities here. Genetic engineering. I mean, we are on the we can literally engineer DNA now. Our own, which is going to be a huge ethical and moral dilemmas for future generations. But also we can do it with animals, we can do it with plants, we can do it with anything. And that is going to be a great tool, but also a possible difficulty. And things like we're able to now manufacture at the atomic level, nanotechnology. These are things that are going to help with the sustainability that we just don't have time to pull off now. Now, I'm going to shift to demographics. In my whirlwind here, these are the millennials, sometimes maligned. I don't think so. I think they're going to be one of the great generations in American history. And here is another way I just want to throw data at you. People don't realize this, but this is the American population right now by age. Every year has got its line there. And this is essentially the ages 20 to 60, which is kind of the guts of the economy. The millennial generation is now out of college now. Baby boomers are sliding off. The millennials are now the biggest cohort in the economy, in the politics, and whatever. And this is a huge shift that people have not wrapped their heads around. If you push one more out, just out to 2025, and you take that same thing where the boomers are essentially all retiring and going off the cliff there, basically, sorry, I'm a boomer. This is America, By the way, Gen Z, smaller generation because you're essentially the children of Gen X, which is a smaller generation. But now, I will say the good news for Gen X, or Gen Z, which I hope you get a better name. With time, we're going to know more about you. And we'll basically say something instead of a placeholder. But this is the global situation, in which case Gen Z is bigger than the millennials around the world. And this is currently globally, boomers aren't even in the game globally right now. Millennials dominate everything and ultimately push it out 2025, same thing, with Gen Z being rightfully in their place. Now, the reason this is important is every generation has a personality. And if you take the millennials, we could go all night talking about the millennials, but, we know they're tech savvy. We know they're super collaborative, which is good in the case of what we got up against this. They're much more civic-minded than the kind of jaded boomers and Gen Xers. Racially diverse, 45%. Up now it's 43 to 45% of millennials. It's the most racially diverse generation in American history. Super global, getting exposed to the world in ways that no other previous generation was even came close to it, possibly the GI generation in the war. And they are totally green. You can have a debate about whether you think climate change is real. No debate in that generation. So you got to think, okay, so the world's been run by boomers. Well, boomers are media savvy, but they don't know a heck about tech, let's put it that way. Much more individualistic, not collaborative. I would say, and I'm one, more indulgent. They were much more into a tax cut than investing in the future, and largely white, very, very white generation, very little immigration in their era. much more nationalistic, partly, didn't get to travel much, and more principled, let's just say, which is they're stubborn. And we got two sides who have been fighting the same war since the 60s, and no one gives up. So, but seriously, what's interesting here is if you think about how much that big generation, the boomers, they reinvented childhood, they reinvented rock and roll, and they reinvented McMansions having big kids in the suburbs. They're reinventing aging, retirement. We know that story, but here's the thing no one's really tracking, is that millennials, they reinvented childhood in their own way. They're reinventing young adulthood. They're streaming back to cities that the boomers abandoned, choking up the cities. They essentially are going to do something different about raising children, I think, in cities. They're probably going to live 20 years longer than anybody since all the different genetics and biotech and everything. And ultimately, they're going to spend the entire century. They're in the game for the century here. So, and it's not in just speculative here, folks. This is the millennials in the workforce of 2000, green, 15, green, 25, green, boom. They are now the biggest in the workforce. By the way, as the boomers came down, the reds, thank God for the Gen Xers in the crowd, holding the boat from collapsing, because one's going off and one's coming on, and you're keeping things sane. And meanwhile, this is literally a fact. 10,000 boomers are retiring every day in the country right now. Diversity. I know this is an issue you guys should think about, but think about this. Our country is also going through a huge racial and kind of diversity issue here. This is essentially the growth of the American population in 2050 and the growth of Hispanic people rooted in of Hispanic descent. And that is essentially by 2050, they're going to be about 30% of the country. Now, if you take that 1980 to 2050, how contentious this is, it's still contentious here, we're still working on it. But if you went back 100 years previous to 1880 to 1950, we had the same trauma around the Irish, around the Italians, around the Jews coming in, early race riots in the early 20th century, all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, they ended up being president and everything else, totally integrated into society. We're in something like that now. And that's just Hispanics. If you look at essentially minorities in general, this is the rise of minorities, population as a percentage, which brings down the percentage of whites. That's the America that elected Obama. Boom, this is Census Bureau things. This is not illegal immigration. That is America. It's looking more like 2045 will be essentially whites will be a minority. That's California today. And that's something to think about. Not that far off. And also not that strange. It's California. I live there. I want to say a few thoughts here as we kind of start to turn the corner here on this, is education. I've been littering a little bit through this whole talk about implications of education, and honestly, it could deserve a lot more time here, but I did want to throw a few reflections here. I think about this, is every one of these eras, by the way, if I went through like the whole around the Civil War and the post-Civil War, the kind of era of the second half of the late 19th century, that was reinvented by land-grant universities and all kinds of different innovations, essentially, in education. You go to the post-war boom, it was all kind of driven, much of it driven by opening up education, the GI Bill and all this to many more people through different ways. We've got to think about what is the actual role of you now. And one level, you have to spur innovation, which is drive innovation. So much of everyone here, the new faculty was all doing a new level of new research. And also, how do you train the next generation to actually adapt and be ready for that next thing? It's a dual thing. How do you deal downstream, and how do you be the tip of the spear going forward? Now, I would argue that we should really start go back and think about, familiarize yourself with what happened in the Enlightenment. This is, by the way, my favorite. It's a big trilogy, but this to me is the best way of understanding the Enlightenment. It's a 3-part series by Neil Stephenson, an amazing author, where he weaves together on all levels of what happened there, politics, society, all kinds of things, in a very entertaining piece, but it was an absolutely compelling way to understand how essentially we built the system of the world. This is the final book here, built off of all their kind of changes there. But here's the one thing I just want to remind us of. One of the things about the Enlightenment that I think academia could think about a little bit more is this is Isaac Newton, right? they were totally multidisciplinary. I mean, the guy was in physics. He was like, hey, discovering gravity. And then he was like in mathematics, inventing, calculus. And then, on top of it, though, he was practical. Isaac Newton was drafted to become the master of the mint. The family said, we got to get a smart guy to figure out how to get reliable coinage so that people won't bite the coins and kind of cheat out everybody and no one knew what was what. And so he was literally the master of the mint. So practical. There was an integration of interdisciplinary kind of thinking and also practicality, which I think sometimes we lose touch with that in many academic environments, particularly recently. The other thing, if you take it more home to our world, of our end of the Enlightenment, intellectual and entrepreneurial, the way I was thinking about it. This is great, of course, Ben Franklin, who was an intellect and he was, in the mind, but he was also trying all kinds of different things. And I think that's the entrepreneurial piece is what I really push here. I think this is a period where we have to be really open-minded about where we're going to go. We can't be thinking, well, 250 years ago, the founding fathers did this whole thing, and we got to, kind of be beholden to this bicameral thing and, all the different ways, the electoral college and all these things that they figured out then. I think they'd be embarrassed at us right now, thinking, guys, we didn't think that was going to last 250 years. We thought it would last 50 years or something. I mean, there's nothing sacred about that. We got to be open-minded about how do we change our politics, how do we use things much more fundamentally. And I think this is a period that's frankly going to demand it and it's going to force it. And we should stay open to that. Because I think when you look at the Enlightenment, there was all these tech and economic changes for that 100 years there, some of which we mentioned. But where did it end up? It ended up with a political revolution here in the French Revolution. It ended up a political transformation came out of all those fundamental changes. And I don't want to call revolution here, but I think what's happening here is the fundamental changes we've been witnessing those last 40 years I've been laying out to you there, I think they're going to push for fundamental system changes. It doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily revolution in the old sense and pitchforks and all that kind of stuff, but I do think we're going to have to really think fundamentally system changes. And so if I were a university, I'd try to capture that spirit of the Enlightenment. And I was trying to think, well, what would you want to instill in the next generation to be going forth in the next 40 years, their 40 years of their next, to kind of be building systems that might last another 200, 250 years. And that's, you want people to be inventive. You want them creative. You want them essentially design would be a big thing. You'd want entrepreneurship. You'd want, critical thinking, of course, from the, communication, persuasion, empathy. These are things that robots can't do. These are things that only humans can do. And this is what you got to kind of make folks do. And so I will say I'm very proud of what you're doing here. As a university in general, I love that motto for the common good, for one. But I also love what the dean's coming through here, thinking about different ways. A lot of the things that as I'm just starting to wrap my head as a board member here is, being connected to the community in ways that you have maybe done as much. Interdisciplinary, get back to the cross-disciplinary kind of fusion of new innovations. Ultimately, be global, send those kids out. Get them out there into the world and get them in meaningful ways. There's many other things to talk about there, but we don't have the time for that. And I want to move to the final section here before we open it up. And that's the Reinvention of America. And this gets sometimes complicated. And I speak to a lot of different audiences all over the place. And so it's difficult because it's a very difficult time right now in the country, and there's a lot of passions all over the place. And so here's the way, but you want to hear me what I say? I'm going to tell you what I think right now. And I think, but in a way, I hope you can hear. So all these eras I mentioned of all these transformations, they all also had these periods of essentially political transformation. And I want to just point out one common theme of all these, and I'm going to use Obama here because I think the start of the real battle started here with Obama, and the beginning of the era, I would say, was the beginning of it. Every single one of these periods started with extreme polarization and extreme paralysis in its politics. And the passions were extremely high. In fact, this guy was assassinated. This guy was shot. This guy was called a traitor to his class. Jefferson was vilified and all the time, and Obama had his depends how you think, but he was essentially vilified in many respects too. And this is reasons why so much is at stake. You're talking about there are going to be whole industries, carbon industries, oil industries, that are going to go down. They're not coming back. The coal industry's dead. It ain't coming back. But there's a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of things locked up in these systems. And so there's a lot of passions around defending these things and doing all kinds of mental things to kind of justify what you do and things. And I think, and this has happened in every era. But the good news is we've always gotten through it. Through these periods, we've always had some kind of reworking of the politics. We've seen a 60% majority of the country morph in one direction or the other, and we've seen the kind of, we get beyond it. We've done it every single time. There's no reason to believe we can't do it again. Now, in my own feeling, we started the beginning of essentially that shift to an all-digital, fully global, sustainable thing with Obama. And I know there might be people that didn't think he was good or had a good job, but I would say there was at least a coherence, I think, toward that vision that I've been laying out. And I think what we're seeing here with Trump, with no disrespect, is he's got a very coherent response to that future. And that's stop, go back, make America great again, resuscitate coal, deny climate change, all this kind of stuff. And it's a coherent thing. It's happened at every juncture there's been people like this. It's happening in Europe right now, the same version in all these different countries. My way of understanding this is that that's the way I would put him in context. I do not see him as the way forward. I don't see that route as the way forward. I don't think that's going to get us farther. We can disagree here. It's a robust conversation, but that would be my way to plant the seed to think about this. And I think the thing that I would also point out is you've got this millennial generation. I showed you the numbers. They are now all voting age, and they are getting electrified now into, with families and everything else. They're starting to get serious. And you saw the numbers on Hispanics and people of color, and they're going to not forget this period right now. And you're watching the anxiety with educated folks and things worrying about climate change and others that are starting to get alienated through the politics right now. And I would say this is going to play out in our politics sooner than we think. I think it's not going to be an old school, go back to the old way the Republicans worked or the old way the Democrats worked. It's not like, the old 20th century Democrat thing has the way forward either. There's something different happening here. And I would say, and hear me out, the closest thing I would say to watch closely about what the future of American politics is, I would argue, is happening in California. And I want to hear me out on this one because people immediately go, oh God, California's its own thing. It's not true. California was a Republican stronghold. It was the birth of Ronald Reagan. It was the birth of the tax revolt. It was the birth of the anti-immigrant backlash. All that stuff happened. And it went national over the course of about 15 years. I have a whole Medium series. I've laid this out in 4 articles about how there's about a 15-year time delay on what happens in California politically. It tends to happen in the United States about 15 years later. Totally plays out on the conservative movement expansion. The paralysis that California was a basket case in the 90s and up to the mid-2000s. We got rid of our governor, recalled him, and we elected a guy who'd never been elected, a kind of a Hollywood star, tough-talking guy. Arnold Schwarzenegger is like, wow, you've got to be able to do it. Anyhow, didn't work. But anyhow, that's what's happening in the United States now. We couldn't get anything done. We couldn't pass a budget. We were just a basket case. But what's interesting in the last bit here, since 2005, the entire state has morphed into essentially a deep blue state. Because they've experienced the future earlier. They've dealt with this diversity earlier. They have dealt with these technologies earlier, if they're born there. They're wrestling with climate change much more dramatically right now. I mean, the entire state's on fire right now. And I think the politics of that state is something to watch. Now, there's other issues, and the rest of the country has differentiation for sure. But I would say that you'd be unwise not to look at what's happening in California right now and how America might morph as well. Because California is not some weird thing. It is essentially America in its extreme, just earlier. That's the way I would think about it. And so you got to start thinking, interestingly enough, about this is the next governor, Gavin Newsom, Kamala, something to think about. And it's not crazy to think that coming off what we're in now, you're going to have a long run here. Now, and that, a long run of essentially different kind of politics, a more unified politics, but more, I would call it progressive politics. Again, can disagree here, but I think there's something to think about. And the reason why is I'm going to make an analogy to end the talk here at the last time we went through a big reinvention. Now, the last time we went through a big reinvention was at the Great Depression, World War II. And this is John Maynard Keynes, who, a great economist at the time, kind of invented, you can think of Keynesian economy. But this is what he said in 1930 in a famous essay. It's worth rereading this because I think it'll get people people are fearful right now. He said, "We are suffering just now from a bad attack of economic pessimism. It is common to hear people say that the epoch of enormous economic progress which characterized the 19th century is over, that the rapid improvement in the standard of life is now going to slow down, at any rate in Great Britain," which is a great power at the time where he was, "that a decline in prosperity is more likely than an improvement in the decade which lies ahead of us." 1930. I believe that this is a wildly mistaken interpretation of what is happening to us. We are suffering not from the rheumatics of old age, but from the growing pains of over-rapid changes, from the painfulness of readjustment between one economic period and another. And he was absolutely right. The post-war boom was the biggest economic expansion and the biggest rise of standard of living the history of the planet has ever seen, and we are still rolling off that thing. And in fact, what we had in a totally contentious 30s, which ended up with wars and fascism and nationalism and craziness, we ended up a pretty consensus in this country and also in Western Europe of a different way of organizing the world and organizing our country. And I think there's an analogy potentially to what might happen here today. They had their challenges, you know, the financial collapse, the Great Depression, Hitler, communism. Nuclear war was their climate change. They had no idea how to solve that. They thought we were going to have cities bombed. I was a boomer and, getting my head under the desk, I remember, for God's sakes. They really thought, how are we ever going to stop that? They came in clueless. They had no idea how to do it. He had the totally wrong ideas when he first came in 32. He did the exact wrong thing to stop the Great Depression. But what you do in each of these situations is you take human resources, human beings, the technologies of the time, you make solutions. We've done it all the time in American history. You had to do it then. And here's, Vannevar Bush, his chief science officer, and some of his leading advisors, and threw him in a room and gave him some chalk and said, "Hey, figure this out." No, but they really were kind of taking what they had at the time. We only had half the brain power of the country. We weren't even utilizing women the way we should have. They were in typewriter pools and stuff. Valuable, but not as valuable as they could be today. And yet we basically essentially pulled America out of the Great Depression. We essentially defeated fascism, contained communism, stopped nuclear war. No nuclear bomb in 70 years was dropped. Built the IMF, the UN, World Bank, all that in the space of 3 years. Built the middle class, the GI Bill and FDIC mortgages and Social Security, all that kind of stuff. This all happened in 15 years. And so we look back and then we say, oh my God, these people were awesome. They're just superhuman. No, they're just like us. I mean, we're just confused and don't know who's doing what here. And in fact, think about it this way. Think about if you went to FDR and you say, "Hey, FDR, I got this thing that you can ask any question in the world and get all the world's information back, prioritized in a second." He would look at you and say, "That's magic." We say, "No, that's Google." And every 5-year-old knows how to use it, right? I mean, we have extraordinary technologies. We have extraordinary brain power and knowledge right now. And so we are totally able to make this transition to this all-digital world ahead of us. We are totally able to make this transition to this globally integrated future world organized on a planetary scale. We are totally able to make this sustainable transition to clean energies and other ways forward. And ultimately, I would say, in 50, 100, 500 years from now, they're going to say, the United States in the early 21st century, that's when the world went digital, that's when the world went global, that's when the world went sustainable, that's when America reinvented itself one more time and moved the world into the next age. And with that, I'm going to say thank you. And a little bit of a kicker. we hit our hour. I jumped the gun on that last slide, but thank you so much. You've been a great audience. I don't know, Dean, do we want it to be? Any case, if people have to leave, that's cool, but we do have time for a few questions. Does anyone want to ask a probing question about what we got going here? Here's a man here.
Yes. What's your thoughts on the universal income conversation that seems to be going on in California right now?
Universal basic income question. Here's what I'm thinking. Yes, that's worth thinking about deeply. And the reason it's being thought about deeply by the technology people is they know what's coming, and they are really worried. And so I think it's a reasonable way to start thinking about how do we move income and wealth around in the society much differently. And I think it's very, very reasonable and very, very prudent to be thinking at that level of fundamental shifts. And I know there's a lot of issues around it. You think, well, you know, freeloading or all this kind of stuff. I just think we're talking about something so fundamental here that we're going to watch disruption on a level that we haven't seen for a while. And it's difficult as it's been. It's going to get, I think, more difficult. And I think if people knew they had a basic safety net there, that every human being has a certain amount of money and you can use that as a way to just pay the rent and keep alive, that will lower the anxiety and allow the transition in a way that would be very, very helpful. Might be other ideas, but I'm saying don't stop any ideas like that. We want many more ideas than that. That's a good start. Let's get more. That's the way I think about that. Any other thoughts about it? Okay, here's the guy here. The AI apocalypse. So did everyone hear that? I think we're good on that. There is a lot of discussion in the popular media and in some technologists about to what extent AI could get so smart that it could outsmart us. And I will tell you that the people I talk to, which is many people in Silicon Valley who know AI quite well, aren't worried about that. They certainly aren't worried about it in the next 30 years or so. And there are such fundamental shifts, excuse me, the level of creativity and invention that human beings are basically able to do are like there's nowhere even remotely close to what a AI can do. And essentially, there is a level of humanity or consciousness that we don't even understand through neuroscience yet, although we're getting actually more and more insights through neuroscience. But we aren't even close to even understanding how humans work at that level. The idea that we could actually bake that into something, a machine, is beyond us, well beyond us now. Now, there are some prominent people like Elon Musk and others who are starting to worry about that. And, you know, it's not like it's super crazy talk, but it is not something we should get too worried about right now. We should be worried about much more straightforward disruption, like, you know, what happens when, and, you know, all accounting could be done by a machine. Except for some super creative things, you know, at the high level legal merger levels or something. You know, that's a lot of people. And, you know, I don't know, maybe there's a whole, I don't want to even say that that's an obsolete category, but I'm just saying that is going to hit a lot more stresses than worrying about our AI overlords kind of letting us kind of be pets or something in the future. I wouldn't worry about that one. And I think it's unfortunate that there's too much of that going on right now in the media that's, I think, misplaced. It really is. And it's very hard for me to find a serious AI person that is really worried about that in any kind of way. Oops, yeah.
So following a little bit on the universal income question, I see population growing at comparable rates, right? We haven't rounded the other side of the J curve, right? We're still growing. We're going to be at 10 billion fairly soon. And technology was supposed to free us from work, right? And it's a painful freedom. You know, we're getting there, and it's very painful because it's not really freeing us from work. It's making more menial jobs more common, right? When you're fantasizing about what the future looks like, what does work look like when you have 10 billion people and we've rounded this curve and technology is replacing so much of our work?
Well, here's the way I would say about it. There's first thing, I think there's a misnomer about overpopulation. I don't know if you exactly meant this, but I want to be clear to people. We are on a track right now to hit about 10 billion people on the planet. We're at about 7.5 right now. We could probably keep it as low as 9 billion. But the point is, honestly, there are more demographers getting much more worried about underpopulation, particularly in every single Western society, including also China, Japan, don't have enough babies being born. And if you're a country like Japan that doesn't have any immigration, or a country like us who may gum up our immigration, if you don't have immigrants coming in, you have a really top-heavy populations that are going to need bodies to do things. And so if you can actually get robots and get machines to do a lot of things that humans used to do, that's not a bad structural thing to be presented with right now. It's counterintuitive right now. We think, oh my God, it's overpopulation. It's not actually the problem right now. Ultimately, long term, we're actually trying to figure out how do you balance these aging populations with enough young people to support them. And so that's one thing I think is worth thinking about that people get wrong. The other thing I would think about is, look about this. 80% of Americans say they hate their jobs. You can look at the polling. Some people say it's 90%, whatever. Not anyone who works at St. Thomas, I'm sure. But I just want to basically tell you, or at Reinvent, I will say. But getting rid of dumb jobs and routine work is like hallelujah. Really. Who wants to screw on 50,000, hubcap bolts, for. Well, okay, so there's nothing sacrosanct of working a 40-hour week. Maybe we'll be working 30 hours for a while, and then it'll be 20 hours. And then you know what? You'll do it voluntarily, or there'll be universal basic income, and some people want to work because they just like to work, and others don't. There's a whole different ways you can imagine organizing society in ways that are very plausible. We kind of get locked again. It's like, frankly, people used to work 80-hour work weeks until the early 20th century when we kind of instituted the weekend, and unions kind of fought for 48 weeks. This is all malleable. It's all social policy. It's all social constructs. This is what I'm trying to say is, let's just stay open to how do you really reorganize this differently. When you have this kind of wealth, you have this kind of power, you have this kind of knowledge, you have this kind of technologies, you have this kind of opportunity here, and that's it. And again, the same thing I would also flip it around the other way is, as long as machines are taking care of all this routine work, honestly, how are we going to solve climate change? I don't have a clue. We need all the brain power we can on that thing. We need the next generation just throwing themselves at that. We need, there's tons of work. There's not like there's no problems to solve. So I would just say it's just kind of how do we want to organize it? So whether it's more dire, hey, we got to solve these big challenges, or whether it's less, more utopian, like, great, we'll be able to play music all day. That could well be what we have in the future. Probably a mix of both, by the way. I know it's getting kind of late here, so we have one more here? You want to do it? Yeah.
So we're not worried about the AI revolution, but we think that maybe artificial intelligence and algorithms could come in and make our lives easier. Can you talk about the ethics of that and how we make sure that we're not making our society worse when we bring in automated?
Great question. And again, this is a great thing for your university here, because I know you have a great ethical and moral kind of framework here to think about stuff. If you just went on default right now, AI will essentially exacerbate inequality in the world right now. There's no doubt about it, because it's essentially people who have capital right now will invest in machines that allow them to do tons more work and get a lot more capital. And there's no mechanism to counteract that. And with fewer people to kind of needed in those situations, then it's just machines printing money for somebody. And so it's going to take social and economic innovation. It's going to take some real moral and difficult choices, but ones that honestly, I think we made them before. We made them in the post-war boom. We made just societal decisions. We said, we're going to invest in new schools. You know what? We're going to make sure everybody gets a house. We're going to whatever. We made our decisions. Europe did their own version of it. You just do it that way. And we can do it again. And I think that's kind of what we got to do. But yes, there is going to be some real challenges here. And again, it's going to take some new thinking. I would say the millennial generation and hopefully the Gen Z generation will essentially be the champions of that next system. And they will be the ones that will look around and say, do we really want to live in a world that's, run by billionaires and a lot of poor people and homeless and, a few people well off? Probably not. Who really wants to live in that? even people who are well off, and there's plenty of money to go around. You know, it's not like the people at the top aren't going to have awesome houses and do whatever they want to do, and their kid's going to do whatever. I mean, you know, it's just once too much. You know, when do you just say, you know what? You know, you don't need that much more. You know, let's spread it around a little differently. Anyhow, that's my politics getting into it. But anyhow, I think these are the choices we're going to have, and I think this is a great community to be working those out. I wish you the best of luck in all that, and I'm going to be part of it a little bit as one of your board members, and so I look forward to the coming years here with you guys. Thanks.